Covering up the covering up. Today we're going to be talking about how Fauci said gain-of-function research would be worth it if accidentally something escaped from a lab, and as well, we're going to be looking at what's going on with a lot of other virologists scrambling. Hello, I'm Dr. Chris Martenson. Let's go take a look. Well, hello everyone. Dr. Chris Martenson here, June 8th. This is episode, what do we got today, Livio? Episode 8, 008. Word of the day, arrogance. Definition, showing an offensive attitude of superiority. Let's see if we can find out where this word of the day comes into play here as we step through some stuff. So we're going to begin right here with the most explosive stuff I can think of, which is that Anthony Fauci, Pope Fauci, the patron saint of all things science for a lot of people in the United States, he's on record here in a paper in 2012 saying that research on highly pathogenic H5N1 influenza virus, the way forward. This is a position paper. He's the only author on this, so he can't sort of hide, oh, a bunch of us were thinking this. Anthony Fauci, 2012, what's he saying? He says here, get this, in an unlikely but conceivable turn of events, what if that scientist, talking about a scientist who's working on gain-of-function research, what if that scientist became infected with the virus, which leads to an outbreak and ultimately triggers a pandemic? Good question, Tony. What if? What if? Many ask reasonable questions, given the possibility of such a scenario. However remote. We'll look at that judgment right there. We'll question him on that in just a bit. Should the initial experiments have been performed and or published in the first place, and what were the processes involved in this decision? Those are good questions to ask when you're experimenting with something that's the equivalent of experimenting on how you make nuclear bombs. You might not want to do that right in the middle of a crowded city. Who knows, right? Scientists looking into this field might say, as indeed I have said, that the benefits of such experiments and the resulting knowledge outweigh the risks. It is more likely that a pandemic would occur in nature. So more likely that a pandemic would occur in nature. That's a supposition, that's an assumption that backs up to that other one saying, however remote. Those two things are connected. However remote, by the way, this thing's much more likely a pandemic would arise in nature. But the difference, Tony, is that the pandemic that arises in nature happened naturally, and we couldn't control that, whereas the one that came because we were mucking around in a lab, that was eminently avoidable. So look at what he says right there. The resulting knowledge would be worth the risks. He's saying here that this is the height of arrogance, or even hubris to me, two words of the day, I guess there, that whatever we would learn from monkeying around with viruses in a lab be worth the risk if one escaped. Continuing down in bold and yellow, says we cannot expect those who have such concerns or these concerns to simply take us, the scientific community, us. Look at that. He wraps us, the scientific community. By the way, there wasn't consensus in the community. A lot of scientists, a lot of them who I respect, said we shouldn't have been doing this in the first place, by the way. They had good, solid arguments. But he says, take us in the scientific community at our word that the benefits of this work outweigh the risks, nor can we ignore their calls for greater transparency, their concerns about conflicts of interest, and their efforts to engage in a dialogue about whether these experiments should have been performed in the first place. Those of us in the scientific community who believe in the merits of this work have the responsibility to address these concerns thoughtfully and respectfully. That's kind of funny because rather than any of this awesome transparency and respect and all that other stuff, what I've been finding instead is a bunch of redacted emails, some secret meetings held amongst all the people who are sort of key in the virology community. And by the way, the people in the virology community not exactly welcoming to outsiders like myself asking them questions. They got a little testy. They got a little arrogant. Their skins were a little thin. But let's hear it directly from Tony in his own words. This is him in front of a Senate committee. I believe he's given this to, I think, a senator at the time, Joe Lieberman's asking questions. 2012 again. Dr. Fauci, in your own words, take us through your logic for why these risks would be worth it.
This policy, which was released on March 29th, strengthens and formalizes ongoing efforts in DIRC oversight and is described in my written testimony. The ultimate goal of the NIH in its embrace of this new policy is to ensure that the conduct and communication of research in this area remain transparent and open at the same time as the risk-benefit ratio of such research clearly tips towards benefiting society.
Now hold on, Tony. So this whole idea, it's gonna remain open and transparent. That's why we're gonna use a cutout EcoHealth Alliance so-called nonprofit to funnel money indirectly behind trap doors to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then we'll deny that later in front of Senate testimony, even though obviously anybody can dig that information actually up. So this whole idea, I mean, the words are there. So here's the actual definition of somebody who's wildly out of integrity. When their words don't match their actions. That's at least one level of that word integrity. So Tony's saying stuff here that I agree with, right? Which is that this needs to be very transparent. We should talk about the risks, because what happens if a pandemic does escape from a laboratory? What if it is this thing that was engineered by humans and it gets out into the world? Maybe we all have a stake in that, which we do, and maybe we should all have a say in whether that went forward. Arrogance says Tony knows better. Tony and his small crew of unelected virologists are going to make this decision all on their own, which is what history is going to show happened in this particular case. So his words aren't matching his actions here. Carry on, Tony. We're eager to hear more.
The public, which has a stake in the risks as well as in the benefits of such research, deserves a rational and transparent explanation of how these decisions are made.
We're waiting. Anytime, Tony, to give us a rational and transparent explanation of how these decisions were made in the case of funneling all that money into Daszak's organization that then went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was pretty close to ground zero for where this whole thing broke out.
The upcoming dialogue related to this policy certainly will be informative and hopefully productive in its goal of benefiting the public with the fruits of such research while ameliorating the associated risks. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, come on. So listen, I do get it. I do understand why you would want to do research on viruses and pandemics and things like that. I am not against that. What I am against were people who were funneling money into really shady gain-of-function things, helping nature get a leg up on evolution by decades, if not hundreds of years, if not even more. So the features of this particular SARS-2 virus, they are not consistent with anything that would come out of nature. And in fact, I think that's why we're having so much trouble with it. Remember, I've covered all of this in my prior COVID coverage. This thing doesn't just bind to ACE2, which is the receptor everybody talks about in the media. It does that with the highest affinity for human ACE2 receptors out of any species. So it's already optimized for humans, but it doesn't stop there. It also comes in through the CD147 receptor. Oh my God, this virus has two keys to the kingdom. That's not so good. It's worse. It has as well the neuropilin-1. It comes in through that receptor, and then there's a number of other receptors. So this thing has already been optimized to have its run in the human body. How it got all those keys to the kingdom? That's a fair question. We should all have a fair, open and transparent investigation talk about that. So there's Fauci saying, you know what? Gain of function, worth the risk. Hey, so sorry about your multi-trillion-dollar economic hit. Hey, so sorry about that loss of a year of life for everybody, grandmas and grandpas and grandkids. Hey, so sorry for all the people who lost their lives. Hey, so sorry for all those people who ended up with maybe lifelong ailments because of long COVID, long-haul COVID, and other downstream sequelae or impacts on their bodies. You know what? It was worth it, he says. All right, let's carry on. Remember, I talked about this from episode 7. This is an email that went from Jeremy Farrar of the Wellcome Trust, and it went to all of these people. A couple of names on here. We went over Christian Anderson. Now, remember, Christian was the lead author on the Nature paper that came out just literally days in a preprint form, just days after sending an email to Tony Fauci saying, this thing might not be entirely natural. There's features in here that are inconsistent with evolution. That's a polite way of saying, kind of looks engineered. What are we going to do? And so that Christian, I publicly challenged him on this channel to say, hey, come on, let's talk science. Come on and debate me. So Christian rose to the challenge and he blocked me right away. I got blocked the next day. And then it went further than that. Then he nuked his whole account. He's a very prolific Twitterer and had thousands and thousands of tweets in there, many, many tens of thousands of followers, and he just nuked the whole account. This account does not exist, and it's gone. Let me show you just a little bit of my background with this, with Christian Anderson, because we went back a ways. He was not totally unaware of me. So I asked him here, this is back on May 13th, 2020. I said, where did that PRRA insert granting a furage cleavance site come from? And Christian, being a good virologist seeking to share his immense knowledge with the rest of us, said, where did humans come from? It's just such a sassy, sort of arrogant and dismissive sort of a response. Humans, well, I guess evolution. So he's just trying to say this thing evolved. That's how it got there. The insert site evolved. And of course I have lots of data to say it doesn't. How would it evolve? How would it evolve, Christian? It doesn't have anywhere to evolve from. Like nearest relatives, like you can't point to an evolutionary pathway, but I can tell you about 11 times a sequence almost exactly like that, if not exactly like that, has been inserted in the laboratory to enhance gain of function of a variety of different viruses. Okay, so that was a very dismissive response, and it carried on. So I went and said, hey, listen, I said, I'm a smart and curious person with legitimate questions. You have had a prime opportunity to educate me and others. Instead, I feel as if I've wandered into an exclusive club of mean kids. Your profession has a legit image problem right now, and in my opinion, you've settled on a very poor repair strategy here. So I'm extending an olive branch. He's being all dismissive. I'm like, come on, buddy. Here's your chance. He said, Chris, I am trying to educate you. You are questioning how a 12 base pair insertion could get into a virus genome. I answered by asking you a similar question. Now, I didn't answer my or your question, so let me do that here. Evolution is the answer, as we described in the paper, which, by the way, came out just days after that super secret meeting, which is all blanked out between him and the Wellcome Trust and the NIH and the NIAID people. So I said, well, evolution is certainly one answer. So is genetic manipulation of the sort routinely used by virologists to explore gain of function and spillover by adding a proteolytic cleavage site at the S1, S2 boundary. Why is evolution more likely in your view? This is a very fair question I'm asking. I'm being very polite. I think I'm asking this in a very fair, open, sort of curious, scientific way. Chris, if you haven't read the SIDRAP article, please do so. It has good answers. What's important to remember here, I look at my computer screen writing a tweet on the internet and I think to myself, wow, how is it even possible? Then I realize I'm not an engineer. This is the kind of response I got from the entire virology community. They're just like, this is the ad hominem attack. Look, you wouldn't understand these things. You're not an engineer. You're not a virologist. That's a very dismissive, very arrogant answer, and it's a non-answer too. It's just basically saying, you wouldn't understand. And so that was the nature of all of our exchanges. So he's a fairly thin-skinned guy, but now I understand why he was so thin-skinned, because it turns out it looks like he had some things that he had to avoid, that he was actually very nervous about. It looks like that there was a cover-up. That's how it smells looking at these emails. So that's what he was worried about. In fact, I loved it. John Montana here said, who knew Dr. Chris was the new Christian Science Monitor? I love that. Thank you for that, John E. Montana. Christian Science Monitor. Get it? That's fun. Anyway, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. Somebody said that sometime about Watergate. So now we're in the cover-up stage of this whole thing. Now remember, there were some other names on that original email listing where they were going over the cover-up meeting. And Christian Drosten is one of them. Here he is. He's a truly arrogant person. Check this out. So Christian, a bunch of middle names. Drosten is a German virologist whose research focus is on novel viruses. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Drosten came to national prominence as an expert on the implications and actions required to combat the illness in Germany. Has the ear of Angela Merkel, very highly prominent, and he's all over the news, and he's constantly opining on whether it's time for a lockdown or not, or masks or 2 masks. Very prominent, but he rose to prominence. They say he rose to prominence during the COVID-19 epidemic, but here we can see he was already very prominent, at least as of February 1st, 2020, which was very early on. It wasn't even technically a pandemic, according to the WHO at that point in time, and he's the first person CC'd on this little thing that's coming from Jeremy Farrar to Fauci and Valence. So this is Anthony Fauci of the NIH and Patrick Valence of the UK. Those are the two most important people, but look at all these CCs, including this guy, Christian Drosten. Now, why am I going all down on Christian here and talking about him? Because now that there's all these open questions about what exactly did you talk about on February 1st. Christian and all these other people. He came out and gave an interview here in this here journal in Germany. And he's also, Drosten turns out is also an utterly unbelievable guy. Look at this. He writes, of the many hypotheses about the origin of SARS-CoV-2, the Berlin virologist Christian Drosten considers fur farms to be the most plausible. He justifies this with the origin of the coronavirus SARS-1, classic SARS, which led to a wave of infections from China almost 20 years ago that claimed around 800 deaths worldwide. SARS-1 comes from raccoon dogs or crawling cats and is closely related to SARS-CoV-2, according to Drosten. Actually, it's not all that closely related. The sequence homology is not, it's actually not that close. I think it's like 76% or 80%, but that's miles away in virology. But he emphasized that it was only a hypothesis, quote, I have no evidence for this except the clearly proven origin of SARS-1, and this is a virus of the same species. Viruses of the same species do the same things and often have the same origin. So, okay, so look how arrogant this is. Here we are, 17 months in. Hey, Christian, if you're listening to this, Mr. Drosten, here's the deal. China's super interested in finding the natural origin of this thing. I think you should get to them with this amazing theory you just came up with just a couple days after the Fauci emails exploded and revealed that you were in on an early collaboration, if not a conspiracy of people concerned about covering up gain of function and or lab origin stuff. And here you are coming out with this idea about raccoon dogs and crawling cats. Check this out. Let's keep going. This is funny. With the first SARS virus, the transitional hosts were raccoon dogs and crawling cats, he said. That is certain. In China, raccoon dogs are bred for fur on a large scale. Wild raccoon dogs would also be brought, and this is a raccoon dog over here. I don't even know what that is, but that's apparently what they are. Wild raccoon dogs would also be brought to the breeding farms. They could have previously eaten bats. Okay, could have been because we saw it before, even though this virus isn't exactly even close to the other one. And these raccoon dogs, they could have eaten bats. They could have eaten bats, which are considered the origin of SARS-CoV-2. Raccoon dogs and crawling cats have their fur pulled over their ears while they are alive, the virologist explained. They emit death screams and roar, and aerosols are created in the process. Humans can become infected with the virus. It was surprising to him that this breeding would again come into question as a starting point for the pandemic. Until recently, he had lived in the naive idea. We're all surprised, Mr. Drosten, that this idea is coming out at this point in time, just days after it's been revealed that you were in on meetings covering up the natural origin of this thing, and in favor of the natural origin and steering people away from the idea of a lab leak. But this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous that any virologist would be coming forward at this point saying, authoritatively, it's certain that SARS-CoV-1 came there, and follow the logic. It's certain that SARS-CoV-1 came from these things. These things are still around. Therefore, we should suspect this. You know what? The WHO team went out and sampled everything. We already have tons of samples from all over the wet market, from every different species of animal out there, and there are exactly zero hits of SARS-CoV-2 in any other animal species in China until the mink outbreaks happened, but that happened after the human infections. We have all the data, but you would have known that as a virologist, because how do we track these things? Through the genetic exact code and the subsequent mutations that happen over time as things pass from point A to point B in the sequence. That's just ridiculous, Christian. Absolutely, utterly ridiculous. But he gives a good point. Stay away from roaring kitties. That's I think where we're going with this one. Got to stay away from roaring kitties. And by the way, for those of you who are sort of been following the news lately, that could also mean this guy here, because that's his Reddit handle was Roaring Kitty. He was the guy who took down the GameStop, the GME stuff, and that's that's Reddit user Roaring Kitty talking about stuff in front of Congress. Yeah, that's how absurd this year has gotten. So thank you, Christian Drosten, for adding to the absurdity and being just an absolute arrogant knucklehead to think you could get away with this stupid hypothesis at this point in time. Just dumb. All right? And no thanks for helping me feel a little bit worse about the science profession than I did yesterday. And I was already getting kind of low. And it's going to get just a little lower before we're done here. And trains. I stay away from trains, apparently, because this came out in May 2020, but it was by this very, very authoritative bill, William R. Gallagher here, PhD, professor of microbiology, immunology, and emeritus down there in Louisiana State University. What did Bill write here? He said, well, human in incubation with SARS-CoV-2, it could hop a human with this inoculation with SARS-CoV-2 could hop a max speed train. They could have gotten on a train. And here why the problem is because the bats that actually allegedly are the reservoirs for this thing, although nobody's found one that actually is, they live all the way down in the Hunan province, whereas the outbreak was all the way up in Wuhan. That's a very far, those two places are really far apart from each other. So you're a virologist and you're trying to think, and immunologist, you're like, how would I account for this? I know a human incubating already with SARS-CoV-2. They could have hopped one of these max speed trains, direct line from Kuning in the Yunnan province, and disembark in Wuhan. Train station, 6.5 to 9 hours later, something that fast. The line should begin service. It began service in 2017. Infected in Yunnan does not spread it there, but this person goes to Wuhan where he or she either falls ill or spreads it asymptomatically to another person, initiating the pandemic there. And then the initial outbreak occurs a short distance from the Wuhan trade station for good reason, because that's where it started. And that, of course, brings us to the wet market. And so this accidental mixed infection in the wild, because you would need multiple species of bats to get stuck with each other, you would get this multiple mixed infection in the wild, and then infection of a human by some sort of bushmeat or bat guano, who then carries it by high-speed train to Wuhan. This is the most likely series of events leading to the pandemic. The only laboratory required is the natural laboratory of the bat cave with multiple species of bats and bat coronaviruses. Found it. All right, if you found any of that confusing, I'm going to help get old Bill's theory. We'll give it some legs here. So the normal Bill sequence of events would have been some wild bat got together with a pangolin, and somehow that mixed up with a human, but that kind of fell apart. So old Bill said, that won't stop me. I got a better theory, like a 5-year-old who just got caught with a cookie in their hand trying to explain what happened. So first we have a bat. We must have a bat. And this bat likes to host parties, and this bat's hosting a bunch of parties, and so it invites a bunch of different kinds of bats. So all these bats are mixed up. I don't know. It's probably some kind of bat orgy. And then the bat orgy gets together, and somehow a human gets involved in that. We don't have to ask questions, all right? We don't need to know. But then a human gets involved, and then, according to Bill's theory, the human jumps on a train. There's one of these packed trains right here, and goes all the way up to Wuhan, which is 1,100 kilometers, and somehow doesn't infect a single other person on this train over that entire trip. And because you know how things are kind of packed and crowded in China. So gets on the train, doesn't infect a single other person, and then gets into a wet market and then goes home and doesn't get anybody infected either there or on the way home. That's the story. Did you follow that? That's legit. That's legit what these virologists are struggling to come up with. You know what the easy answer is? The easy answer is somebody was monkeying around with this in a lab, and it got away from them, and it infected some workers. It happens. It's happened a bunch of times in history. It's not like, we know that natural breakouts happen all the time. Yeah, you know what else we know happens all the time? Stuff escapes from labs. Both happen. So you have to be equally balanced, which means Bill's whole thought process here, that he thought he could use his authority to come up with this ridiculous chain of events as the most likely, found it super arrogant. And this is actually something, this arrogance and hubris is infecting this whole, I got to tell you, I've had very few positive interactions with this virology community. They're just like doctors on steroids or something. Their egos are off the charts. Speaking of which, Stephen Goldstein here, he's a postdoc or even further along, wrote with Angie Rasmussen, who was on this program, and wrote about why the best evidence we have still points to a natural origin. They're still writing this. And of course, the Washington Post is running with that. Washington Post really being a Jeff Bezos rag, which is very interested in certain points of view and not others. I don't consider that at all a credible thing. And by the way, that article was super weak, Stephen, super weak compared to other stuff out there. Hey, look at this. Amy Maxman, writing for Nature, and we'll get into this Nature article in a second. There was David Baltimore's a very prominent person in the sciences who, when seeing the data for especially that PRRA insert, said, this is the smoking gun. Here she says, quote, "It's very clear it's not a smoking gun. I wrote David Baltimore, and he said something similar to me. He added, I am tired of it. So actually, she makes it sound like David Baltimore recanted his smoking gun statement. He didn't. What she's quoting here, it's very clear it's not a smoking gun, is one virologist talking to another virologist in an entirely unrelated program. Neither of these two are David Baltimore. So this is like really misleading. Amy, if you're a writer, you really shouldn't be all that misleading. But Marian Koopsman, and you will remember the name Marian Koopsman as well because, let me back up here, she too is one of the people on these lists right here. Oh, right there. See that? Marian Koopsman right there. If you can follow my little screen over there, cursor. All right, so Marian writes, got to get all the way down past that funny train ride. Yeah, here we are. She writes, here. So there's this article in Nature. It's the divisive COVID lab leak debate prompts dire warnings from researchers. Oh no, and she writes here. So loving this article. What is this article? This is written by this woman, Amy here, Maxman. Divisive COVID lab leak debate prompts dire warnings from researchers. Calls to investigate Chinese laboratories have reached a fever pitch. Get that? Get the language? Fever pitch. In the United States, as Republican leaders allege that the coronavirus causing the pandemic was leaked from one, and as some scientists argue that this lab leak hypothesis requires a thorough independent inquiry. But for many researchers, such as whom, Amy? The tone of the growing demands is unsettling. They say the volatility of the debate could thwart efforts to study the virus's origins. No, you know what thwarted it? Was people like you writing articles like this over a year ago so that we didn't begin the investigation with full force in China 17 months ago. You know what? It's kind of late now. China's been very unforthcoming, and by the way, they've had plenty of time to hide the evidence and all of that if they wanted to, which if I was them, I kind of would if it came out of my lab. So she writes, she carries on here, global health researchers also warn that the growing demands are exacerbating tensions between the United States and China ahead of crucial meetings at which world leaders will make some high-level decisions about how to curb the pandemic and prepare for future health emergencies. As the World Health Assembly this week, at the World Health Assembly this week, for example, health officials from nearly 200 countries are discussing strategies, including ways to ramp up vaccine manufacturing and to reform the World Health Organization. But a U.S.-China divide will make consensus on these issues harder to reach, says David Fidler, a global health researcher at the Council on Foreign Relations. That's who you're going with, Amy? We're going with the Council on Foreign Relations? This is Nature. This is a science magazine. And all of a sudden you're writing what the political ramifications of this are, which are not inconsiderate. I get that, but maybe we should leave that to the State Department. I don't think scientists really should be involving themselves that much in what the political ramifications are. Science is science. As soon as we start injecting politics into science, we're not doing science anymore. We're doing something else. It's totally fair, but let's be honest about what we're doing. Nature is a science magazine. It's not a political magazine, okay? It's not a diplomacy magazine. It's not where I go to figure out what I need to know from that standpoint. And by the way, this is, Nature's just so unscientific at this point in time. They've clearly thrown down for one particular thing over another. Now, this was the Barrick, She. These two, Ralph Barrick down here, She. These two are the ones, this is the article that actually caused all the hullabaloo in that meeting that happened February 1st back in 2020. But look what Nature, the magazine, is put in yellow, tagged it under this particular article, and other ones like it said, editor's note, as of March 2020, so they got circled this wagon early and they haven't taken it down since, we are aware that this article is being used as the basis for unverified theories that the novel coronavirus causing COVID-19 was engineered. There is no evidence that this is true. Scientists believe that an animal is the most likely source of the coronavirus. Look at that. Scientists believe. They just put all the scientists in a spot. Scientists believe the most likely. No, scientists don't all believe that. I'm a scientist. I don't believe that. And by the way, you know why this is kind of personally painful and disappointing for me? Because one of the most proud things I had in my background as a postdoc was that I managed to become first author on a paper that went into Nature. It was a huge achievement for me at the time. 1993, dating myself there, but such as it is. So for me, Nature was always this pinnacle of science, and it was one of the best possible places you could get your work published, and I always trusted Nature. Now I don't trust Nature because they're being biased, they're being political, and they are not being truthful, and they are doing CYA activities on the basis of things. That's not science. So disappointing for me, and a little bit upset with that. By the way, we're going to go deeper into these subjects, and if you want to come by, and if you like science, if you like open debate, if you want to know what's actually going on, you want to have any shot at understanding how the future is going to unfold, come by Peak Prosperity. For those of you who may be coming for the first time, we have a special offer for you. Click the link right down here. That'll take you straight there. If you miss clicking this link, don't scramble. That link will also be down in the description at the bottom of this. All right, remember to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We will see you next time. It's been great talking with you about this. Bye, everyone.